Okie doke. Recording is in progress, we're told. So good afternoon, everybody. Nice to be in touch. It's a little bit it's helpful having Zoom to be able to do this, but it's always better in person. So maybe someday we can meet in person with the gang. With this group. Looks like we've got a handful of people, so I guess I'll begin. I'm going to speak a little bit about the book, The Man Who Solved the Market, why I wrote the book, some lessons from the book, from the Renaissance experience, from the Jim Simons experience. On the one hand, I wrote it just a few years ago. On the other hand, it actually feels kind of fresh because I'm at the Wall Street Journal, and frankly, and just between all of us, I've been tweaking and improving his obituary. Not because Jim is in a condition where we need to be concerned about him, just because, as you can imagine, people who've made big contributions into this world of ours, we prepare obituaries ahead of time, and hopefully they won't appear for many, many years. But he is in some ways fresh in my mind, so it's actually a good time to be discussing him. So yes, I'm at the Wall Street Journal. I've been here since 1996, a very long time. And I write about markets, I write about people, write about firms, individuals. And I always kind of wanted to write about Jim, and was always told, don't even waste your time, Greg. I reached out to Jim years ago. Originally, maybe 2015 or so, maybe even earlier, and was told he's not going to cooperate, he's not going to work with me. Those who are familiar, those who've read the book, but also those who are a little bit familiar with Jim Simons and Renaissance know that's the most secretive firm out there that I've ever experienced, that's for sure. And they don't like talking. They clearly don't like profiles. And in a book was the last thing that Jim wanted. So why did I do this book? When he right away kind of initially said he wouldn't cooperate, for a bunch of reasons. Partly it's because they are the best. They have the best track record in history. 66% returns annually for decades. No one comes close, even after you deduct the outrageous investor fees that they charge. They're still better than Soros, better than Ray Dalio, better than all the rest. So the returns are crazy. Jim is also a pioneer, and his colleagues are. They were doing predictive algorithms. They were doing artificial intelligence, machine learning in the 80s, in the 1980s and 90s, perfecting it. I mean, Sam Altman was in kindergarten. Mark Zuckerberg was in grade school. So they were in some ways pioneers, and not just in terms of algorithms, obviously, and machine learning, but quantitative finance. I mean, about a third of trading today is driven by computers, and not individuals, not people using intuition and judgment. It's automated or otherwise considered quantitative. So again, Simons and his team were pioneers there. They're pioneers in other things too. Data, cleaning data wasn't a concept in the 1980s and 1990s when they threw themselves into it. They collected it, data, when big data, alternative data, all this kind of stuff that every day today is taken for granted, both on Wall Street and in every other industry. And yet Simons and his colleagues were doing it before everybody else. So that's part of why I wrote it. So there's the returns, there's the fact that they're pioneers, there's the fact that Simons and his colleagues have brought in influence on society. I mean, Simons and his politics, his backing of people, Democratic candidates in the United States, and his philanthropy. He subsidizes public school teachers throughout New York City. He's trying to get treatments for autism. He's trying to understand the origins of the universe. Groundbreaking stuff. And Bob Mercer, his colleague for many years, I would argue is the most important, or among the most important reasons why Donald Trump won election in 2016. There was a point in the summer of 2016 when, after that video, if you guys remember, when about Trump and boasting about doing things, inappropriate things to women, the polls looked really bad for for Donald Trump, and Mercer went to Trump personally, along with his daughter, and said, "Hey, you've got to put these two people, Kellyanne Conway and Steve Bannon, at the helm of your campaign." And love them or hate them, they turned that campaign around. And that was Bob Mercer, and Bob Mercer was a longtime executive and colleague of Jim Simons. So these people have had broad impact on broader society, for good or for bad. But often what happens is I write these books, and it occurs to me along the way what's really motivating me, what's really gotten me very excited, and it's usually some paradox. And in this case, and there's similar paradoxes, frankly. So my first book was The Greatest Trade Ever, and it's about this guy John Paulson and a few others who anticipated the financial crisis meltdown of 2008, and it shouldn't have been those guys. And the few women that I write about, it should have been who should have been? Should have been banking experts anticipating the meltdown, Bernanke, Geithner. They got it wrong. It should have been short sellers. It should have been mortgage experts. No, they all got it wrong. And it was these odd, unusual individuals that I write about. John Paulson was a merger expert. He knew nothing about mortgages, and yet he made $20 billion for himself and his firm over 2 years, figuring out a way to bet against toxic mortgages. So there's that paradox. There was also a paradox a few years later. I wrote this book called The Frackers. Frackers is about these American individuals who spawned a revolution where today we're actually exporting crude, we in the United States, to the Saudis. It's a crazy thing. And we're the biggest energy producer in the world. I mean, I assume you guys are young and too young to remember, but I remember growing up, and it was an assumed thing that we were running out of oil and gas in the United States, and it all changed, and it wasn't who you would have expected. Again, that same paradox. It should have been BP. It should have been Exxon. It wasn't. It was sort of odd, quirky individuals in Oklahoma and North Dakota and Texas that I write about. More recently, I did this book called A Shot to Save the World. Once again, who should have produced these vaccines, these COVID vaccines, to save us all? It wasn't Merck and GSK and Sanofi. Those are vaccine companies. They are the ones who we turn to for MMR, the measles, mumps, rubella. That's all Merck, and it wasn't Merck. Merck, for various reasons, I write about in my book, they couldn't pull it off. They weren't interested in stepping up. It was this company, Moderna. No one had heard of Moderna and BioNTech, this little German company. Unlikely heroes. That's kind of what motivates me often in these books, or achievers. And same thing here. So why was Jim Simons the one and his colleagues to have the greatest returns in history? It should not have been them. They don't really care that much about markets and business and investing and trading. I grew up with a passion for this stuff. I ended up writing about it. I wasn't a good investor myself, but I remember being in camp and between periods and calling up a broker and making trades and having a counselor bring me back Barron's magazine from a day off. And I remember eating a peanut butter and jelly sandwich in the back of the Skippy can. I was like, wait, there's no Skippy Corporation. It was like Procter & Gamble or something. That kind of fascinated me. It doesn't fascinate the people at Renaissance. They couldn't care less. I mean, I'm generalizing here, and not all of them, but most of them don't care about trading and investing and even money, at least before they get there. Once they get there, they care a lot about making money. But most are academics, they're mathematicians, they're scientists. They care about puzzles and math problems, scientific problems. They're not motivated by this stuff. A lot of them aren't even capitalists. When I talk to people there, they're not sure. They're not convinced capitalism is the best system. Some are, some aren't. Some are liberals, and some are conservative. It's a whole mix. But they're not fascinated and interested. They didn't read like the books that I do growing up, Peter Lynch and all those kind of stuff. They don't care that much, and yet they're the ones who solved the market, as it were, had the best returns. It shouldn't have been Jim Simons and his colleagues. So that's kind of the reason I wrote this book. To understand how it all happened. And that's what my book is about. I don't know. I'm assuming some people have read the book and some haven't. Should I assume that? I see a nod there. Okay. So yeah, that's what I'll presume. Um, and so I'll tell you a little bit about the book and some lessons from the experience, and then I can stop and we take some questions if there are any. So who's this guy, Jim Simons? He was a geometer. He goes down in history as one of the greatest geometers. Actually, he's a fascinating guy. I think. For a lot of reasons, but among them is that he's had success in a lot of different areas. And if he had only stayed in mathematics, he'd again go down in history. Nonetheless, setting aside all his subsequent successes in trading and other kind of areas. So he was a mathematician, taught at MIT, taught at Harvard, but he had this hunger to make a lot of money, frankly. And he was never embarrassed about that. Others kind of were ashamed of that or pretended not to care about money or didn't care about money in the world of academia. But Simons had this hunger, and it wasn't clear why. I've talked to people, family members and others, and they thought money led to power and maybe wanted some power and influence on society, and for good or for bad. It's still not entirely clear to me. I'm not really good as a writer on motivations. Others are better. It's one of my weaknesses. I'm not sure of my own motivations. People I went to met this kind of this guy, this writer Simon Sinek. I wrote a piece about him, and he does a lot of self-help and business, and is very, very successful. And his whole thesis is you have to know every business, every person has to know their motivation and what drives them, and can't be successful otherwise. And I was thinking as I interviewed him, I don't even know my motivations, what drives me, let alone others. Geez, I don't know how. I'm still figuring that out. Maybe that's a process. And Jim too. I again, he was a lot of things motivating him, among them money, but he's also kind of a restless kind of guy. So he taught, and he was a very popular professor, but he left academia to break code, to go work for this organization in Princeton that was working with the U.S. government in the Cold War, going up against the Russians. And there he learned how to build predictive algorithms, work with other really smart, quirky, talented people. But he lost that job because he protested the Vietnam War publicly when his boss was publicly in the New York Times supportive of the Vietnam War. So he lost his job, and then he went to Stony Brook to run the department there. And there he picked up other skills such as recruiting and finding talent. And he's got a great eye. Among the reasons why Jim Simons is so fascinating is that he could do the math. And while he was at Stony Brook, he did work that is still referenced, and it's among the best in the world of geometry. I had to learn some of that stuff for the book, and I think at the time I didn't know what I was writing about, but now if you asked me, it's sort of like cramming for a test kind of thing, and did okay on the test. But yeah, if you ask me about geometry today, the level of geometry that he deals with, there's no way I could explain it, but I think I do in the book. Be that as it may. So he's a great geometer, but he's also got a great eye for talent and recruiting, and had this way of bringing people in to Stony Brook and saying, hey, you don't have any interest in leaving an Ivy League school, Cornell in particular. I'm thinking of one individual to come to Stony Brook, this upstart department. Well, I'll find a way, is what he said to himself. And be it the location near the water, be it more freedom, more academic freedom. He figured out what motivated each other people and was able to recruit as a result. And that taught him some skills too. So he's at Stony Brook and doing really well, head of the department, among the greatest mathematicians, or at least geometers of the era or any time. And he leaves. He gives it all up to start this trading firm. We're talking 1978. It's in a strip mall, deep out far in Long Island, next to a pizza store, a woman's clothing shop, boutique. And he doesn't really have an approach that he's sure is going to work, but he's got a sense. He's got this instinct that there are patterns in the market. There's a structure to the market that people don't appreciate. At the time, there were some technicians, technical analysts, who kind of looked at charts in a crude way. Most everybody else was investing in a fundamental fashion, sort of talking to executives and trying to use their instinct and intuition. And other people just thought everything was random, random walk kind of thing. And Jim said, no, that there's something there. Maybe these are fleeting patterns, short-term oriented patterns, but there's something there. And that's what he was trying to do as a scientist, look for structure when other people didn't think it existed. So he spent years trying to figure out a method to trade, to take advantage, to find these patterns and take advantage of pricing patterns in different markets. And he went back and forth in different approaches. He started off kind of trading like most everybody else, picking up the newspaper, looking at the news, betting on gold and silver. He did pretty well with this kind of more traditional approach, but he couldn't handle it physically, literally. He had stomach pains and physically, and he said, I felt like a dope when I made a mistake, and he beat himself up, and ups and downs of the markets, like those who trade can understand, were hard on him. So he said, I got to find a different approach. And the different approach was this quantitative approach, handing the decisions over to computers, letting them look for patterns and signals in the noise and take advantage of them kind of on their own, and hand the decision making over to these computers. And it took him years. We're talking, so he started in 1978. By 1990, they were making progress, and he had done a great job of hiring and recruiting top mathematicians and scientists. And again, using that approach of, oh, you don't care about hedge funds and trading, you find trading kind of boring and beneath you. Well, look at it differently. Look at it as a challenge, as a math problem. This is the most challenging one you're ever gonna find. Come spend the summer with us here at Renaissance. Come spend a few days. Come by and visit. He was great at recruiting, and they made progress. They were doing pretty well in the bond market and commodities and currencies, but they couldn't figure out stocks. They still couldn't. And we're talking 1990. So they spent 12 years. And you think about it, the reason why it's called Renaissance Technologies is because at one point he was doing as much kind of venture capital kind of investing on his own as he was trading. It wasn't clear the trading thing was gonna work. So they made a lot of progress, but it wasn't enough for Jim. He wanted to be big. He wanted to be rich. He wanted to be not famous at all. That doesn't really motivate him. But he wanted, I mean, in the world of mathematics, he wants the recognition, but not in the broader world. But he wanted to be big, and he knew the only way to do that was in the stock market. And they were not making progress. And I write about it all in the book, and the challenges and how they overcame them. It was largely by bringing in these computer scientists from IBM, Bob Mercer and Peter Brown, who currently runs the firm, and this guy, David Magerman. But he also had a lot of good luck, too. Magerman is the one who, and I write about it again in the book, I love the anecdote where he found a glitch in the system that everybody else had missed. There was a number that wasn't updating. There was an S&P 500 number. And Magerman went to his boss, and Bob Mercer, and kind of said, hey, boss, I think there's a mistake here. This thing isn't updating. And at the time, Magerman was not a popular person internally, had messed up a few times, brought a virus into the company, and was close to being fired himself. But he discovered this mistake, and they figured it out, and they were off to the races. So it took them years. And part of the concern I had writing this book is that, look at these returns, 66% a year since 1988. What's the drama here? What's the tension? What's the obstacle? And I kept finding them over and over again. I didn't realize how long it took for them to figure it out. And even again, once they figured out in some markets, like didn't do it in stocks, and it took them till like 1996 or so. And then they figured it out on the equity side of things. And so my book is about how they made the money, but also how they dealt with the money and how it tore them apart. Because again, Bob Mercer is a right-leaning individual, and Jim and others are left-leaning, including that gentleman I mentioned, David Magerman. And when it came to Trump and the election, it really tore them apart. And Mercer today it has gone, and he's up in New Hampshire, and partly because of the reaction people had to his support for Donald Trump. So that's kind of an overview of the book, The Man Who Solved the Market, and the Jim Simons and Renaissance story. I'd be glad to take a few minutes and answer some questions, and I can give you my sense for kind of what they do differently, what their secrets are, if that's of interest to people. But I'll take a few minutes and stop right now.
Any questions in the room? There's a part in the book, the early data collection process. There's, I think, one figure, I forget what his name is, but he's sort of the original data scientist. Can you talk a bit about that aspect of Renaissance and like where they went to grab data and like transcribe it and transform it?
Yeah, so there's a guy, Sanford Strauss, and it speaks to, and this is kind of a larger point I was going to make, uh, good fortune, the importance of good fortune. And the older I get, the more I realize that a lot of success in life is good fortune. And when I was younger, your age, I didn't really want to acknowledge that. You figure you work hard and you do what you're supposed to do, um, and there'll be a payoff, and there often is. But the older I get, the more I realize that you need good fortune as well, or at least not bad fortune, and maybe it's 50% of it. So why do I say that? Because yes, Jim recruited Sanford Strauss, and Sanford Strauss was just a guy who worked in the computer room at Stony Brook. He was a computer scientist, smart guy. He took it upon himself to not just so they all realized the importance of getting data. They wanted data to create this automated system and to build it on that and to use machine learning to to include all that data and let the system decide on how they should trade. And the only way to do that is getting better data and getting more data than anybody else. And Jim gets a lot of credit for that. But it was Strauss who was obsessed with cleaning it. And now it's an obvious thing. You got to clean your data. You want clean data. Back then it wasn't. So what does that mean? That he was by hand going through. So they went down to the Federal Reserve, for example, in New York, and got gold prices going back to like the 1700s. And he would go through it and look for weird blips and kind of figure out, well, was that a sharp movement in trading, or was that someone inputting the number incorrectly? Once he found, I remember him telling me that there was a day where something odd was happening and it was a snow day or something, and somebody got it wrong or they didn't input it in properly. So to his credit, he took it upon himself to be obsessed. He was like maybe the first or early kind of data specialist. We're talking the 1985 or something, if I remember from my book in 1986. So again, Jim gets a lot of credit, and he should, but so do his colleagues, and also just the good fortune of hiring the right people and them taking it upon themselves. And when I speak broadly about good fortune, I speak about other kind of things too. Again, that David Magerman stumbled onto the glitch, and would they have found that eventually? Maybe, or maybe not. And also just more broadly, Jim Simons, he's worth about $29 billion. He's given away maybe $1 billion or $2 billion. Goes down in history as one of the most successful and acclaimed mathematicians. He's a code breaker, academic, obviously investor, but also, frankly, he had a lot of bad luck in life too. He lost 2 sons tragically. One son was run over in a biking, not even a biking accident. An elderly woman was backing out of her car and didn't see him and ran him over. And another son died of a scuba diving accident. So again, that speaks to just the importance of good fortune in life. If there aren't any more questions, I can share a couple of thoughts on what it is, what the secrets are.
Yeah, sure. Tell us what the secrets.
Okay, sure. So people generally like the book. The reviews were good. And go on Amazon, all that kind of stuff. But one of the criticisms, and of course, as a writer, we mostly focus on the criticisms, nothing else. One of the criticisms is, well, Greg, you didn't give me a formula. What's the formula? How do I do this at home? How do I do this myself? And that there isn't a formula. That's the whole thing. But there are secrets, and I didn't, frankly. They're in the book, but I should have isolated them. And maybe if we ever do a paperback, I'll do that, like a page of his secrets. So here they are. There are a lot of them. So my point is that there are there are like 15 to 20 things they do better than everybody else, and you add them all up, and you get to this crazy performance. Part of it is this early obsession with data, and they've got data that's better than anybody else. It doesn't help them as much today as it did in the past. Today, a lot of people have really good data, but it still helps to have go back to, you can plot things and model things going back centuries, and so it helps. Not as much as in the past. But they do other things. They recruit better than everybody else. So when I go around Wall Street, you get a tour of someone's offices, they say, well, Greg, over there are our PhDs. Look at that desk over there. We've got our PhD. Renaissance is full of PhDs, like over 100 PhDs. And it's not just PhDs. They've got people that ran math and science departments at top universities. So the brain power is unmatched. They don't really lose any talent competitions other than to big tech companies. So they've got great talent, but it's more than that. They work together like no firm I've ever seen. Most every other firm, and I'm talking about quant firms too, they operate in silos. Different groups have mandates and power, and you can understand how that happens. Someone does really well one year, you want to give her a bonus, a big bonus, right? And she wants to hire some people, and you give them little fiefdoms, and it happens everywhere. And it does not happen at Renaissance. And I've talked to people who say, well, we wish we could be like Renaissance. Everybody works together there. It's like this academic model almost. Their presentations are group presentations. It's an open architecture where even junior people can see the code, the secret code. And it's a crazy thing. So and Jim really believes in people working together. And you say to yourself, well, how can they do that? This is secret code. Everybody's working together. Everyone has access to it. So part of that, the reason is, and again, Jim kind of stumbled into it a little bit. He doesn't hire, like everybody else, he doesn't hire people with experience on Wall Street. It's mostly academics. So as a result, he doesn't worry, or when he ran the firm, he doesn't run it anymore. He didn't worry about people leaving to go work for another hedge fund, because you're just not going to do that. You're from the world of mathematics, let's say, and you go work there for a few years. You're not going to go work for another hedge fund. First of all, you do so well at Renaissance, you're going to stay there until you leave. And then you probably go back to academics or philanthropy. You don't know anybody in the hedge fund world. You're not having drinks with somebody at Two Sigma or some other rival kind of thing. And also they'll sue the hell out of you if you do leave and you go work for a rival. So for all those reasons, they can have this open architecture and they work better together than anybody else. And the way it was explained to me is that Jim's genius is managing genius. So it's recruiting the right people, getting them motivated, getting them working together. There are other things I can talk about too. The leverage, the fact that they've kept the fund, the medallion fund, at around $10 billion and capped it. So that's the biggest mistake I see over and over again on Wall Street. John Paulson, that guy I talked about earlier, he after the greatest trade ever, he let his fund get to like 32 billion or something, and then the returns were awful. So there are a lot of little things they do much better than everybody else.
We have a question from the chat.
Okay.
Thomas wants to know, do you have a sense of what technologies they used? If we're talking about the 80s or 90s, are we talking about supercomputers, what programming languages, and data storage solutions?
So I probably put in the book, I forget, but the way it was emphasized to me, and this is by somebody senior there today, who I'm not sure why he's talked to me, but he has, thankfully. He kind of said, Greg, our systems are not more powerful or more impressive than others. It's actually, they're a little bit embarrassed by them. They're probably being a little modest. I'm sure they're very good systems, but they're not better than everybody else. That's not the secret. They're not faster. They're not. What they do is, I should really explain. I apologize. They do medium frequency trading. So not high frequency. It's not milliseconds kind of thing. It's not jumping in front of others. So they don't have to be the fastest. It's moment. Their holding period is the way they explain it internally is moments to months or seconds to seasons. But my sense is that the holding period is on average a day or two, but it could be shorter. But again, it's not milliseconds, so they don't have to co-locate and all that kind of stuff and be faster and have better systems and faster than more powerful than everybody else. They have to be good, and they are. But that's not the secret and the key.
Am I misremembering that, like, in the 90s, after poaching a few folks from IBM's NLP team, was Renaissance the first to use like natural language processing and entity recognition for trading?
That's a good question. Among the first. They were among the first with a lot of this kind of stuff right, and they did it better, and they did it well. I appreciated the importance of this stuff, and also just more broadly, just turning the decisions over to computers and being religious about it. So in the book, you will recall there are a few times where Jim steps in and overrules the system. And frankly, there's a lot of drama there, so I focus on it. And they were important periods, but they were exceptions. And now he's not running things day to day, and it doesn't really happen anymore. They turn the decisions over to the computers more than anybody, even most quant firms, in that they will pursue signals that don't make any sense whatsoever. It's not to say they'll put a lot of money on those signals. They'll put some on them. And then they'll try to figure them out afterwards. But if they're mathematically valid and yet make no sense whatsoever, some pattern is reoccurring that they can't figure out why, they'll still put some money on it, whereas other firms won't. So there's a distinction there. So they were very early on the need and the importance of just having the decisions be made by their systems, and if you recall, there's some anecdotes which I find kind of amusing where Bob Mercer doesn't even remember the names of these companies. And I think he talks about, there's some big presentation where he makes, and he talks about Chrysler stock. He gives Chrysler stock as the example, and to some clients or potential clients, and everybody's cringing in the room. They're like, Bob, Chrysler hasn't existed as a stock for years, and he's giving that as the example. They're like, oh God. But because he doesn't care. He doesn't care about the names of the companies or the business. That goes back to my other point, which I find confounding, because this is what I do for a living. I find the dynamics of companies and the rise and fall. I find that kind of stuff interesting. They don't, or at least many of them don't. They're scientists. They're just looking for patterns. And it actually, and somebody said this early on, they would rather stocks not have a name, just have a number associated with them, because they don't believe in stories. And I have come around to that view. I'm a storyteller. So, I'm undercutting my own approach, but we believe in stories way too much in society. And we trick ourselves in some ways, and we all feel, people on Wall Street, I cover Wall Street, they're like, well, if you sit me down in front of the executive, I can figure out if he's or she's telling the truth or not, or what they're really saying. Really, you're such a good truth teller and decipherer of this stuff. No, we all aren't. And that's kind of one of the insights of Renaissance people. You can't figure that stuff out, or it's hard to. And let the computers decide. And it's a forerunner of automated everything, driving, all that kind of stuff. We make a lot of decisions. All the behavioral science, economics mistakes that we're all familiar with today, Renaissance people instinctively appreciated years ago.
I mean, on the topic of stories, like in the process of writing about Renaissance and doing these interviews, did you go in with an assumption or a narrative that you had about Renaissance, and were there moments that fundamentally changed it? How did your story of Renaissance change over the course of researching it?
It's a good question. Part of it was that assumption that they figured something out and then they were off to the races, and it was just more persistence and resilience and stubbornness on their part. And there were so many obstacles along the way that I didn't appreciate when I started the process. I also figured there must be some key formula, and there might be that I missed. But even if there was, it's changing. The markets are changing. They're aware of it. They're also much more, there's much more modest or humble, I should say, than I would have expected. They don't really know why they're better than everybody else. Objectively, they're out in Long Island. They don't have drinks with other people, other firms, investors. They don't deal with that stuff, so they're not sure, frankly. And they're also always saying the market's changing, and yeah, we've got signals that have worked forever, but they may not work tomorrow. So they're not like long-term capital, where they got a little bit high on their own drugs, maybe wouldn't be appropriate, but they got caught up in their own approach, and they were more certain of their approach than you would have thought, and it hurt them. The Renaissance guys aren't like that.
So Yeah, speaking of the Renaissance guys, for those of you who haven't read the book, there are a few really funny moments, like just of what went down in the office. Like among them is like a weight loss competition between some of the guys who worked there, where one guy got so sweaty that he arrived to the office soaking wet and then microwaved his underwear to dry it and then lit the microwave on fire. Anyway, that's one of my favorite parts of the, not what I was expecting going into a book about Renaissance.
I forgot about that one. I forgot about that one. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's really like a book of characters. Like you come in and there's like everyone who enters is like could have a book of their own. Is there, and I know you're not, you're a Simon Sinek skeptic about motivations, but like is there a kind of like a quality of person who Simon looks for in hiring, do you think? Or because it's obviously credentials, he's going for like the top mathematicians in the country and like the top scientists at IBM and that sort of thing. But do you think there's also kind of an underlying personality trait or something like that that he looks for when hiring people?
No, but it's accomplishment in the world of math and science, and those who are accomplished are often quirky. And I found that in my other book, A Shot to Save the World. I went into that one a little worried that it's a book really about scientists and researchers, that they'd be kind of boring. And on the contrary, if you're an accomplished scientist, you're a little bit unusual, and there's a lot of fighting in that world with each other, and neurosis and competition, and that was reassuring as a writer, that to be. And so the same thing with Renaissance. I was a little worried the characters wouldn't be compelling, and they were just fascinating. And mostly in Jim more than anybody. I mean, his smoking and his and I don't even remember the scene where he takes a cigarette and he's got no ashtray and he's in this big meeting with clients and he's got an ash, so he sticks it deep in this sheet cake that had been ordered for the clients. And he's burying the cigarette in a cake in front of everybody else. And then he kind of walks out the door. So I think it's not to say, and people in this room, you have to be odd and unusual and quirky to accomplish a lot in the world of math or science. But some, that is a trait. That is a common trait.
Sure, right. It just, I was surprised by just how much there was there.
Yeah, me too. Thankfully, yeah.
Yeah, I guess my next question, obviously a magician doesn't reveal his tricks, but what was like the process? Like obviously at the beginning, like Simon's in Renaissance, like it's a very hard thing to break into. They don't want to necessarily be written about. Like what was the process of starting this book and like getting into contact with the people at Renaissance and like doing these interviews?
First thing is I collect a lot of inappropriate photos of them, and blackmail is really my biggest. No, I'm kidding. So basically, I do a lot of work before I approach these people, and I presume they'll hear about it, and then they get curious and they realize I'm not going away, and I'm pretty persistent, and I want to hear what they have to say, and I impress upon them the importance of sharing their perspective. So I don't go away, and eventually they come around often, not always, often. So Jim eventually talked to me, and we sat down, and I dealt with all the smoke in my face, and you just appreciative of being in his presence. He's a fascinating guy. I do this for a living because I like meeting interesting people. So he's an interesting guy. So you deal with the smoke, the chain smoke. So eventually he came around, and other people did too. So I was very grateful. I apologize that my I should have checked this before, but my power, I'm losing some power here. So, but I maybe have time for like one or two more questions. I apologize. And feel free to, if I lose you, feel free to reach out to me if people are on. They want to send me an email or Twitter, whatever, LinkedIn. I love hearing from people, so I'd love to. We can follow up other times. But yeah, I probably have power for one or two more questions.
Sure, thank you. Rohan, do you have anything?
Can you ask the millionaire one?
The sports millionaire. Yeah. Okay. Rohan wants to know. So you've written about two children's books that are about athletes. And Rohan wants to know and you've reported on Wall Street for like 3 decades. What is the biggest difference between a millionaire athlete in their late 20s and a multi-millionaire hedge fund manager in their late 20s?
I've never been asked that
Yeah,
question.
if
I've
neither of
done
you care about money, then
You've
what?
been saying no one at Renaissance. Sorry, you were saying like nobody at Renaissance cares about money. They're in it for the challenge, right? I'm
Yeah.
assuming athletes, you know, the money's nice, obviously, but they care about playing basketball or whatever. What are the differences between them?
So first off, I wrote those two books with my two sons to inspire young people. It's about athletes, sports stars who overcame challenges, racism, physical differences, abuse, sexual abuse, physical abuse, poverty, all kinds of different obstacles. And it was really inspiring for us to meet these stars. We went and talked to them, and it's crazy what they've overcome. So we did that to help young people, and we had a lot of fun with that as well. And listen, I think everybody in life wants to be somebody else. So like rock stars, Sting, whatever, they hang out with Wall Street people. They kind of wish they were like that. George Soros, I spent a lot of time writing about George Soros. He always wanted to be seen as a philosopher and a thinker. So everybody on Wall Street wants to be like a model or with a model or sports star. And the sports stars want to be kind of seen for more than their bodies. And they hang out with Wall Streeters, sometimes like nerdy Wall Street people hang out with these stars, musicians or athletes. Everybody wants to be somebody they're not. I find not everybody, a lot of people in life. So I don't know what the lesson is there. So in terms of the differences between those, they're all driven, frankly, and they all overcome so much. And that's sort of, I think I'm very focused on the obstacles in life. We've all overcome obstacles, and that's frankly why I do this to some extent. I love interviewing people. You put me down, like my wife will like tease me, but you put me down like at a bar mitzvah, and I'm talking to the dentist, and the dentist, you can laugh or giggle, whatever, or an accountant. They've overcome shit that, I bet you drill a little bit, you dig a little bit. Maybe their parent died at a young age, or they had something happened, or some setback. We've all dealt with it. And the older, I'm older than you guys. So, but I'm really very focused on that stuff and how you learn. And like I'm writing right now, I've got a new book I'm writing about. It's about the greatest investments and trades in history. And I'm starting in 1987 and the crash of 87. And I don't want to give away too much, but there were some people that were catatonic and fetal position after losing so much in a few days, like 60%. And other people just kind of said, next. How do you clear the deck? And I'm thinking about one person in particular who sold at the bottom. And instead of beating himself up, he kind of said, okay, where do I go from here? And I just find that human trait really impressive. And I try to learn from it myself.
We have a question in the room.
Yeah, quick question. So I was wondering if you could speak to a little bit about how OpenAI fits into your kind of model of firms and organizations of exception. I imagine somewhere in your mind you're thinking about maybe the book after this book about the rise of OpenAI and all the drama that happened internally there. If you get access, I think that would be a great book. But just in general, I was wondering if you can comment for a minute on whether you think what went on in OpenAI is kind of an example of exceptional practices. Did they just get lucky? And where do you see the future of this work? Do you think that they are going to be able to maintain their advantage, or do you think they're going to get gobbled up by the big players, Google and Meta, once they the bears wake up, so to speak?
It's a great question. I did at one point think about writing about either Sam or OpenAI or broader topic as a book. I decided not to for various reasons. I have a colleague who is writing a book. I'm sure there are many others about Sam and the whole story there. It is fascinating. What I find most interesting is that unlike some other areas of business, they have this balance, people in that world between their idealism. There's some level of idealism and EA, and I wrote a lot about Sam Bankman-Fried, and I talked to him a few times, and I did some stuff on FTX, and I don't think it was all BS. This whole focused to some extent, there was some interest in helping the broader world. I think it's a little naive to some extent. EA itself, it's a lot of people with whatever. I don't want to get into too much. But that's unusual. That's unique. On Wall Street is unusually generous and philanthropic. And look at Jim Simons again; he's all about philanthropy for a long time now. George Soros too. You can like him or hate him, but he's trying to help the world. So the people on Wall Street are very philanthropic, but they don't mix it with their business, with their focus, their day to day. It's after hours or it's after their career is done. And yet, but when it comes to AI, and a lot of people like it, OpenAI and elsewhere, Anthropic, Sam Bankman-Fried to some extent. I'm not saying he wasn't a crook or a criminal, but I do think he also, some part of him wanted to help the world too. That's unusual to try to mix the two, and the existential risks of AI are really important. So I'm no expert. I'm not going to presume to be expert. Those are all good questions to ask, though.
Any other final questions?
What books is it?
Oh, okay. So your books are all excellent. But in terms of other people's books, are there any books you recommend or return to over the years?
There's a book called Indecent Exposure by David McClintock, which I loved, and doesn't get enough attention. I think it's, if you're interested, it's like Hollywood in this era where like Coca-Cola was buying the studios and the personalities. I think that was a great one. And then all the classics, Barbarians and all that kind of stuff, and Den of Thieves are formative. I didn't go to journalism school. I kind of learned to write by reading good work from different people, and I'm still trying to improve. There's a book by Saul Stein. I'm at my desk right now that I'm reading. It's about writing. So I'm not yet where I want to be, but you can always improve your craft and hone your craft.
Great. Well, thanks for joining us. We really appreciate it, and have a happy new year. I don't know how to end these things.
Feel free to reach out if people have comments, critiques, criticisms. Some of my best sources are people that originally had some criticism of some kind of a story, which is cool. So feel free to reach out.
Cool. Thank you.
Bye, guys. Stay well.
Bye.